an anonymous MP has nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize, and I'm going to read out in full an excerpt from that letter, and I assure our viewers and readers this is real. It's come from an MP, but at the moment the MP wishes to remain anonymous, as do his colleagues, who are now starting to understand the industrial scale of child abuse in Britain. I am a British parliamentarian, and I'm writing to nominate Mr. Robert Greene for the 2015 Nobel Peace Prize. Robert Greene is a British children's rights campaigner who has been actively involved for several years in challenging the failure of the police in Scotland to properly investigate the extensive child sex abuse allegations of Holly Gregg, a young woman with Down syndrome who was allegedly sexually abused as a child by a large and organised paedophile ring. Especially in the wake of the revelations about Jimmy Savile and his extensive child sex abuse in the UK, which the authorities failed to thoroughly investigate, over the last few years there's been a growing awareness of the need for the UK authorities to take child protection and the investigation of child sex abuse allegations much more seriously. Robert Greene has sacrificed his personal finances, job, reputation and freedom in his ongoing campaign to have the Holly Gregg case properly investigated. The Aberdeen police in Scotland, who should be thoroughly investigating Holly Gregg's child sex abuse allegations, have instead repeatedly arrested Robert Greene and twice raided his house in England and seized his property without returning it. Even as I write this nomination letter, Robert Greene is in prison in Scotland, having been arrested for at least the third time by the Aberdeen police on the 13th of February 2014. These repeated arrests have been despite the fact that all that Robert Greene has campaigned for is for the Aberdeen police to do their job and properly investigate Holly Gregg's allegations of child sex abuse. A matter of great urgency, since whoever abused Holly Gregg is likely to be still extensively abusing other children. Holly Gregg is originally from Aberdeen, Scotland, and has named at least 22 people who allegedly sexually abused her since she was a child, and these alleged abusers include head teachers, social workers, a senior police forensics officer since deceased, and a judge. She also named 7 apparent victims of these alleged abusers. The Aberdeen police have so far refused to properly and thoroughly investigate the Holly Gregg case, only interviewing at most just 2 of the 22 named suspects, and not even bothering to check their computers for possible possession of child pornography images, as is normally done with suspected child sex abusers. Aberdeen police have also refused to interview any of the victims named by Miss Gregg. This disturbing pattern of repeated arrests of Robert Greene by the Aberdeen police suggests that the arrests are a means of obstructing and stopping Mr. Greene's campaign for the abusers of Holly Gregg to be brought to justice. Just allow me to catch up here. Contrast the speed and intensity with which the Aberdeen police have pursued cases against Robert Greene with their sheer reluctance to interview the suspects and victims named by Holly Gregg. Consider also the fact that if Holly Gregg's allegations are true, then there is a fairly large number of child abusers who are left free to continue abusing other children in and around Aberdeen and perhaps further afield. This is not just an issue for Scotland, since children's rights are universal, but also because paedophiles travel extensively across borders in search of victims. To protect children from abuse is to protect our future, because children represent the future of nations. Safeguarding and nurturing children also helps to ensure both present and future peace and stability in society, and thus also between nations. Children are also the responsibility of the entire community, not just their parents. And Robert Greene has set not just their parents. And Robert Greene has set a sterling example of sacrificial care and devotion for the security of children by his relentless campaign for the Holly Gregg case to be properly and thoroughly investigated by police, and his general active support for children abuse cover-ups to be publicly exposed. Child protection is one of the very urgent and challenging issues of our times, whether protecting children from sexual exploitation and sex trafficking, or protecting them from sexual abuse by getting law enforcement agencies to perform their duties diligently and professionally to protect children and apprehend their abusers. Now, as I've said, that's an excerpt, and if anybody wonders why that nomination is for 2015, I understand that the present Nobel list is closed for this year, so that nomination has had to be pushed into 2015. But a pretty clear statement from now a group of MPs in Westminster who, I'm happy to say, are clearly waking up to the scale of the problem and the fact that it is our own government, both in Westminster and north of the border in Scotland, that are covering up the abuse. We just thought we'd remind you of the people who are really the powerhouse with Robert Greene. Meet the Scottish cabal who can arrest Englishmen in their homes and imprison them without proper representation using secret courts in Scotland. And it's very clear because, of course, Scotland is now under the control of a cabal. Here we are, Scottish Justice Secretary Kenny MacAskill, SNP leader, of course, Alex Salmon, and a very, very powerful man now running the whole of the police force in Scotland, Sir Stephen House. So these three men, with no separation of the powers, the court system is mixed in with politics and the police. This is, in my opinion, a pre-fascist state in Scotland. They can do as they like. And luckily we're getting some reports now through the Scottish press. So the Scotsman here picking up on the fact that the Public Accounts Committee in Scotland is now being picked up, and the key part of the story I'll bring on screen. This is due to the fact that material which is considered politically undesirable is being expunged. So if I bring you down to the final paragraph here, the subject of the report was the centralisation of the 8 constabularies into one, and whether or not the policy outcomes and financial targets were being achieved. Standard fare for the PAC, but this still proved too sensitive an issue, so references to government shortcomings in the original draft prepared by committee clerks following in-camera discussions by the committee were expunged. These included the failure to produce a business case that could test the accuracy of predicted savings, worsening relations between Police Scotland, its governing body, and the government, and the hiring of more interim staff than anticipated, producing additional costs that will make the achieving of savings targets more challenging, and a need to find savings of 1.1 billion from the Police Scotland centralisation by 2026, a higher figure than forecast by the First Minister. So here we've got the scam. We're going to unite 8 Scottish police forces into one huge police force, Police Scotland. It's done on the scam of we haven't got enough money and we've got to achieve savings. And then when people begin to pinpoint the truth that this is a lie, what do? Well, you rub out the information. And of course, David Cameron's a master at this, because it's the Tory party that a few months ago was deleting information from their website so that voters would not realise that they'd failed to live up to virtually every promise they'd made. We're not being sarcastic. It's pretty obvious to see that we're heading into what I would call a pre-fascist society, and it's going to take movement by a lot of good people if we're going to withdraw consent and stop this thing. But if we finish on the children, why do we need to focus on our children? Because our children represent the future of society.